Hey, what's up? Nick back with another Photoshop tutorial for the DIY musician. And just like this video and all the others in this series, it's for beginners, people that are kind of just starting in Photoshop, maybe to intermediates. So previous knowledge is not required. Of course, it's always beneficial. But if this is kind of your first foray into Photoshop or you're just getting started, don't be afraid. And even though we're going to be making this really beautiful album cover here, it's easier than you might think, absolutely nothing to be scared of. And while I'm using Tesseract as an example, of course, this is not necessarily officially affiliated with the band, but we are going to be making a digital album cover, really high resolution, really professional for the kind of a Djent style of music. And not that Djent always has to be like this, but typically the artwork associated with that music is a really nice blend of really clean, beautiful geometry and organic shapes and imagery. So something very much like this could work great, but obviously if you're into that kind of music, you're probably aware of a lot of the different album covers that are out there. I'm just using two of the big ones as an example, like Periphery and Tesseract, their new one called Polaris. And that's typically what you find in that kind of album artwork. And if you're doing that kind of music, obviously it's okay to make the conscious decision to go somewhere else if you want to. But usually you do want to create something that just generally fits within that style of music, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. So this is what we're going to be making, and to do this, we actually only need a couple of files. It's going to be easier, like I said, easier than you think. We really just need a picture, a font, and these things called custom shapes, which we're going to get into in just a little bit. Everything that I'm going to use, you can click the link in the description below and download it and kind of follow along. This video is going to move fairly quickly, so feel free to pause at any time to catch up if you need to. And of course, if you have any questions about what I'm doing, you can ask me in the comments below. Now, unfortunately very busy, work a lot during the week, so I'm not somebody that's just on YouTube 24/7. But if you do ask me a question, I will get back to you as soon as I can, usually within a day or so. So let's get started. Let's open up Photoshop. There we go. Like I said, this is of course a Photoshop tutorial, and it's really kind of this is how everything is really created these days. There's some free options out there, which are getting better, but it's really still all about Photoshop. And if this is the first video you're watching from me, then obviously welcome, but just a quick reminder, Photoshop's no longer, $600. It's a subscription service that you pay monthly for, which if you're a student or affiliated with a school at all, and basically if you have a .edu email, it's only $10 a month, and if you don't, it's about $20 a month. So there's really no excuse to not have it because, for a musician, it is extremely useful. All right, so got Photoshop open, and if we're going to do a digital album cover, obviously it's going to be a large square. So whenever you open up Photoshop, you pretty much have to ask yourself, hey, am I going to make something new, or am I going to edit something that has already existed? So basically, you go up to File, and if I wanted to, let's say, mess around with a photo that I have, I would go to Open. But whenever you make something like album artwork or social media banners, that kind of thing, you really need to make a canvas that is a very specific size. So we're going to go up to File, New. And we're making a digital cover, so I want to make sure that my unit of measurement is set to pixels. My color mode is RGB, because those are the three colors that mix within the pixels on all the screens we use. So anytime you're doing a digital project, it should really be in RGB color mode, otherwise it might look a little faded or kind of weird. Our resolution should be set to 72. And then the width and height, again, this is going to be a really large square. So we're going to do 3000 by 3000. So 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels, and you might be wondering, hey, that's pretty large. And you would be correct if you're thinking that. So basically, if I was making a digital cover and literally all I'm going to do is upload it to SoundCloud, this is actually overkill. It's bigger than what it needs to be, but the thing is, whenever you upload stuff, it will automatically shrink within that platform. So if I make something that's larger than I need, SoundCloud's going to shrink it automatically. But the thing is, if somewhere down the line you decide to start using a service like CD Baby or DistroKid or Wix Music or like any of those kind of places that give you distribution across other platforms like Spotify and iTunes and Amazon, generally this is a pretty good size for that stuff because it's this one graphic that really needs to be flexible across multiple platforms. So it's always good to go larger rather than smaller. So 3000 by 3000, 72, RGB color mode. If you think you're going to be making more digital covers at all, you can use the save preset, and you can save this so that anytime you jump into Photoshop, you can just go right to those dimensions quickly. I'm going to click OK. And what I've got here is this big white square. Not that you have to, but usually my first step whenever I open something up, just because I don't usually like to look at a white canvas, is I'm just going to fill the white canvas in, or our paper, with a different color. In this case, we're actually going to go with black. Now, if you look up at the top right of Photoshop, there's a window called Swatches, and you might see one called Color. If you click over to Swatches, this is basically a huge collection of quick access colors. Now, if you're just opening up Photoshop, you're probably not going to have nearly as many colors as I have. That's just because I have a bunch that I have saved from other projects and that kind of thing. But right up here at the top, we just want to click on black. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a tool called the Paint Bucket, which even if you remember back from Microsoft Paint, if you had the displeasure of using that program ever, the Paint Bucket is a tool that just fills with color. And it's right over here in the toolbar next to the Gradient tool. All right, you might have to click and hold, select the Paint Bucket, click, and we're just going to fill it in. And what that does just fills in our background with the solid black. And if I look over here in the bottom right in my layers window, I have one layer. All right, we'll get into layers a little bit more in just a second. But one layer background filled with black, nice and easy. All right. Now, one little shortcut that I usually like to do, depending on what monitor you're working on, of course, is the F key on the keyboard switches between screen modes, and that goes from full screen to windowed all the way into preview mode, which obviously is kind of hard to see right now because it's a black background. But it's usually a good idea to work in full screen mode like this. Not that you absolutely have to, but just it's good form. All right, so I have black background. The next thing that we're going to do, and whenever you start working in Photoshop, really, it's usually a good idea to work from the ground up. So you work from the bottom to the top. So you think about the background first, then you work your way to the foreground. It's kind of like when you're recording music and you usually record the drums first, because that's kind of the foundation for everything. So if I think about that album cover that we were making, and again, if you want to take a look at it, it's in the files that you have downloaded from the description below. That geometric pattern that you see there, the one that's kind of turquoise and appears to have some sort of imagery inside of it, is going to be where we start. And we're going to do this using what are called custom shapes. So in Photoshop, the shape tool, which is right over here, and I've gotten into this a little bit in some of the other video tutorials, the shape tool is exactly what it kind of sounds like. It's about making shapes. It's like squares, rectangles, circles, that kind of thing. But it can also do some more advanced stuff, like, for example, triangles and polygons, dodecahedrons, all that stuff. And what we're going to be using today is something called the custom shape tool, which is everything else, really. And we're going to be using this to create that beautiful geometric pattern that we just saw a second ago. So right over here in the toolbar, you probably see a rectangle. I'm going to click and hold, and we're going to select the custom shape tool right there. And then up here at the top, I have two things that I care about right now. We're going to get into some of the other stuff in just a second, but I have fill and I have stroke. And just worth noting, I'm in the new version of Photoshop, CC 2015, even though it's 2016. But I believe this is going to be the same going all the way back to CS6. However, if you're in CS5 or earlier, this is going to be a little bit different, and it's time to upgrade. It's been many years. If you're not on at least CS6, really, really try and find it, because it was a significant improvement in pretty much all aspects of the program. So the fill color is just, what is this going to be filled with? So if I wanted to make, for example, a pink rectangle, I would select the rectangle tool. I would select pink as my fill color. For right now, for the fill, I'm actually just going to pick white, although it actually doesn't really matter. So if you want to just pick any color that's not black, because we just want to be able to see it. The stroke is a border or an outline around the shape. And for right now, I want to turn that off, which is this little white or gray box, depending on the version that you're in, with a red line through it. So we're going to turn that off. And then before we do the next step, just want to make sure, if you go up to View, make sure something called Snap is turned on, which is right here. And you'll see what that does in just a second. It's going to make it really easy for us to get the shape that we create centered in the middle of our canvas, which is exactly where we want it. So as long as we've got the custom shape tool selected, our fill color is set to anything but black, and stroke is turned off. And again, just make sure that you have Snap turned on under View. then we're ready to move into the next step, which is going to be to load in and create these shapes. All right, so let's make our shapes. Now, as long as we've got the custom shape tool selected, which we do, up here at the top, kind of middle of Photoshop, you should see a little drop-down menu that if you're just loading up Photoshop for the first time, it might have an arrow inside of it, but we're looking for this section right here. And this is kind of, at the moment, you can see a little bit about what the custom shape tool is all about. Is there's all of these, really kind of basic generic shapes like envelopes and scissors and playing card symbols and airplanes, that kind of thing. And you can obviously see these are a little bit more complex than just a rectangle or a circle. But just to tell you, I mean, these shapes have been in Photoshop since I think I started in Photoshop 7, which was quite a while ago. And they've pretty much been here since then. I would not recommend using them for any kind of even remotely professional project. They're just super dated and boring, and just ignore them. However, what's cool about this is we can load in shapes that other people have created, that if you continue with Photoshop and Illustrator down the line, you can also make yourself. And one of the files that we downloaded was something called ornaments, and it was a file, the extension is a .csh, and it is a custom shape file. And I'm going to go in here and go to, right over here at the top right of this window, is a little gear icon, and if you click it, you can go into load shapes right here. Also, if you have the custom shape tool open and you just double click the file from, let's say, your desktop or a window, then it does exactly the same thing. It will load it in automatically. I personally, just out of habit, usually load them in manually. And we're looking for this file. It's called ornaments.csh. And just so you know, this file, which I really like, it's quite beautifully made, is created by a DeviantArt user right here called Ahmed Al-Shayal. Sorry, butchered that one. It's a collection of ornaments, and he also has another one, and they're really all just beautiful and really well done. And for the most part, the stuff here on DeviantArt is okay to use, especially if you're just kind of using it for fun or practice like we're doing right now, or for educational purposes. But if this was something you did want to actually use commercially, like let's say you wanted to get thousands of copies of your album printed or something like that, it might be a good idea to reach out to this person and just find out what the commercial uses are for it. Just a good idea, and maybe also give them some credit for the work that they've done, which is also a good idea. So now that we've got those custom shapes loaded in, right inside this window, you may have noticed that a bunch of other stuff has popped in as well. That's normal. But if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, I have all of these new shapes, and it can be kind of tough to see them because the default view for Photoshop is very small. So if I go up here to the gear icon and go to large thumbnail, this is usually how I like to browse custom shapes, just because you can see them a little bit better. You can kind of get a little preview about what all these things are and what we're going to be creating. And obviously, if you want to do a different one instead, that's totally cool. But what we're doing is we're going to kind of like scroll through here, and we're looking for one that's called Casale 028, which is right here. All right, and it kind of looks like a very complicated donut. Donuts. Anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to take this, just click on it once. And again, just a quick reminder that we've got our fill color set to white or something else, stroke set to nothing. And I want to bring my cursor somewhere up towards the top left. And I'm just going to hold down the Shift key. Now, Shift in Photoshop, much like other programs, is the key that will, it's all about geometry. So this is going to let this circle basically be a perfect circle. I'm going to hold the Shift key down, and I'm going to click and drag. That's looking pretty good. Now I don't want to make this all the way to the edge, but somewhere around here looks pretty good. Now I want to make sure that I keep Shift held down, and I want to release my mouse first. And it's going to look just like this. All right. Now chances are what you just created is probably looking pretty cool, but it's not centered. Also, it might look a little strange because if you notice that fill color set to white is doing some strange things, but we're going to get to that in just a second. So to move this around, one of the most basic things in Photoshop, the most basic tool, is the Move tool, which is at the top of the toolbar up here. All right, they just changed it in the new version of Photoshop to this little kind of crosshair. It used to be a little arrow with a similar symbol next to it, but same thing. And if you also notice that in my Layers window down here, I no longer have just background, I also have Shape 1. And I'm just going to click and drag. And you should see these purple lines pop up. These are called smart guides. And as I start to bring this thing towards the center, this is telling me right now that it's centered vertically. And if I move it down a little bit, it's centered horizontally. And this is exactly what we're going for. We're looking to create this shape, and we want to get it exactly centered right in the middle of our cover. And that looks good. Right. For the most part, the way Photoshop works is when you create new things, like let's say text or shapes, they usually create new layers automatically. This is kind of how everything in Photoshop is kind of put together, which you'll see a little bit more of in just a sec. Try to think about it like tracks when you're recording. You know, you record every instrument on a different track, so that editing and manipulating those are easier. Same thing in Photoshop. You create each element independent from one another so that you can move them, edit them, and whatever, and it doesn't mess with other aspects of your project. So we've got this shape. Let's go back to our shape tool right here. Now you might notice all of these little kind of boxes and lines or highlights, whatever you want to call them, around the shape. Photoshop by default is going to show you the edges or borders of a shape. And for whatever reason, if you would like to turn that off at any time, you can go up to View and then click Extras, and it will hide that. Personally, I usually like to just leave it on, but it's really up to you. So here's what we're going to do. At the moment, our shape looks, it's kind of cool. It's obviously very geometrically complex, really beautifully created. I'm going to go up to Fill, and we're actually going to turn the fill color off, which is going to look kind of like this. And again, we're not actually seeing anything. That's just the outline of the shape. I want to go into Stroke, which is a border or outline, and I'm just going to pick really anything. I'm just going to pick white for this. So what that does is it basically switches the shape from being filled with white to being outlined with white. So all those edges are really the focus now instead of what was inside of them. And if I go up to View and I turn Extras off, you kind of see that this is what we just made right there. Now that border really doesn't look bad at all, but I'm going to go ahead and this number right next to Stroke, that's probably by default set to 3 point, is basically the width of the stroke. So I'm just going to try, let's say 5. That's looking a little bit better, maybe 6. I don't want to go like too thick with it, but I think that actually looks pretty good. Somewhere around 6 point. Yeah, that's looking cool. All right, so this by itself actually looks kind of cool. You know, again, whenever you're in the creative process, there's always a bunch of different directions that you could go with it. There are a couple things that I'm noticing, and that's basically inside. There's a lot of, it looks like maybe line overlapping and that kind of thing. So some stuff that you can do, again, this is just kind of real basic shape control in Photoshop, is right here next to 6 point, I can go into this line, and this is my stroke option. So this is where you have some control over what the stroke's actually doing and what those borders look like. And if I go to, let's say, this dash line here, it might take a second to render because there's a lot of math happening behind the scenes. So if your computer freaks out for a minute, that's okay. Go get a cup of coffee, come right back, and oh man, this is taking longer than I thought. So what this is going to do once it loads in is, at the moment, the border lines of our shape are solid, and this is going to switch it to a dash line, and you actually also have a ton of control over those if you go a little bit further into this kind of stuff, and you can make your own strokes, that kind of stuff, which can be very cool. And all right, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip ahead until this is done rendering. So feel free to mess around with these if you want to, and then we'll come right back in just a second. All right, so checked out some of the dash lines, strokes, but now back to just a solid line right here. And the stuff that's a little bit more useful, especially for what we're doing right now, is below this where I have align, caps, and corners. And this is going to control basically the relationship of the stroke to the shape itself. And let's just check out align. And don't worry, this won't make your computer freak out quite as much as switching the actual stroke itself. I'm going to switch it from this first align option to the one right in here in the middle. Now let's just watch how the shape changes. So this already looks a little bit cleaner inside the shape. The overlapping lines are not quite as apparent. And let's just try that third one out too. Okay, so I'm really liking the way that that middle one looks more so than the other two. And feel free to experiment with caps and corners. And basically what those are doing is, like I said, they're just changing where that stroke is in relation to the shape and also how those lines are kind of intersecting. And they're just some basic options. Sometimes they're very useful, but with more complex shapes like this, it can also just become a little bit overcomplicated. But feel free to experiment with them because they are non-destructive and you can always put them back. So what I've created here is my custom shape. My stroke is set to white. The stroke width is 6 point. And I have also changed the alignment to right here, which is centered. Exactly what I want to do. I've also, of course, used the move tool earlier to get this right in the middle of my album cover. Now this is actually, like I said, looking kind of cool by itself. Now one thing really quick, if I wanted to just, let's say, make this shape bigger or smaller, this is of course been in all my other video tutorials, but just in case this is your first one, Command T or Control T in Photoshop if you're on PC is how you make, it's called free transform mode, how you rotate, make things larger, smaller. You can also use it to move. Now the thing is, I have this right in the middle. If I wanted to make it larger without changing its position, I hold down the Shift and Option key. I believe it's Shift and Alt on the PC, but I'm exclusively on Mac these days. So I maybe can make this thing even larger. Now whenever you're in free transform mode, this check mark up here at the top is what gets you out. And if you want to go back to where you were a second ago, you just click the cancel button right next to it. And if you're in full screen mode, you can hold the space bar, click and drag and move it around. Command plus or minus zooms in and out. And like that actually looks kind of cool. It could potentially be a start of a cool cover. But I'm going to go back to where we were. All right. There we go. Of course, stepping backwards and forwards and all that stuff can be found up under Edit as well as keyboard shortcuts. On Macs, it's Option Command Z. That's how you go backwards. So the next thing that we're going to do, this shape's looking pretty cool, but we're going to kind of take it a step further and we're going to add some imagery inside of it. So what we're going to do is there's a picture that was, again, part of the files that you downloaded. And I have this picture and I want to bring it into a pre-existing Photoshop project. So I go up to File. Now I wouldn't want to do Open because it's going to open it up in a separate project. I want to go to File, Place Embedded. This is how we basically think about it, like importing a picture. And I've got this on my desktop, and it is this picture right here. It's a really nice high resolution picture of space. It's a little blurry, and it's probably not something I would use by itself as is, but because we're going to be putting it inside of something like this crazy shape, it might actually look really cool. Because if you zoom into it a little bit, it's a very, very kind of blurry, and again, taking pictures of space like this is very difficult, so that's pretty common. But it's going to work great for what we're doing with it. And this is also from a website called unsplash.com, which is a great free image resource where you can download and use the pictures for really whatever you want. And I'm going to place this in, and it's going to look just like this. Now, we want to make sure that this picture, before we do anything, is taking up the entire shape. Because right now it is, you can see, you'll still see some of the shape up here at the top and the bottom. So I want to hold down the Shift and Option keys. Again, that's on Mac. I believe it's Shift and Alt on PC. Please let me know at the bottom. I haven't really touched the PC in years. There we go. So once it's that size, again, I just want to make sure that I can no longer see any of that shape underneath. I'm just going to click that check mark up here at the top. Gets us out of free transform mode. And now before we do the next step, it's important to just note the layer order over here. If you notice that the photo is right above shape 1, and these layers, just like things in real life, are stacked. Stuff that's on top is on top, stuff that's underneath is underneath. So we can no longer see our shape because the picture is above it. So what I want to do is I want to take this picture and I want to put it inside of that shape. Something that might look, again, like it's really complicated or tough to do, but it's actually extremely easy using something called the clipping mask. Again, been in a couple of the other videos on my channel if you've checked them out. But the clipping mask is basically like, I've got this picture and I want to put it inside of something else. Over here in the layers window, I'm just going to right click Brings up a menu. Now Photoshop is very finicky about where you right click, so you get in the habit of right clicking, really where the name of that layer is. And right here, about halfway down, there's an option to create a clipping mask, which is exactly what I'm going to do. Create clipping mask, and just boom, like 1 second, that looks really cool. This is just a really kind of a super useful thing that's just part of Photoshop. Clipping masks allow you to put certain things inside of other things, and they're extremely useful for design at all levels. Obviously, that did something very cool very quickly. And now if I go back to my move tool, not that I necessarily need to, but I am able to move this picture around within that shape. And no matter where it is, it's still only displaying inside of that geometric pattern that we created, which is really cool. Now just be obviously aware, if I go up too high, that picture is still its size that we set just a second ago, so it's possible that I will run out of photo if I go too high. But that looks pretty cool. Again, this is kind of a very vaguely kind of eye-like design, where this geometric pattern is sort of like an iris. We've got a sort of pupil in the middle, and then this beautiful space picture that we're using as kind of a texture in the background is kind of creating that eye-like quality, which is again very cool. Definitely fits with that kind of music. Also created pretty easily. But we're not done. We've got a couple of other quick things to do. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put in an album title. So text in Photoshop is really at its base level really easy. So what I've got here is a font that, again, is part of the files to download. It's called A-Space. A-Space is from dafont.com, D-A-F-O-N-T.com, which is a great place for fonts if you are looking for some. By the way, this desktop here is one of my original pieces for a big album cover project that I've been working on with a band the last week or so. It's coming along really cool. So to install a font on a Mac, at least, all you do is you double click on it. Opens up a program called Font Book. I'm going to click Install Font. And it might take a second. And this window is just popping up because I've already installed the font, which you would probably not see. All right. Installing a font on a PC is also very easy. All right. So I've got that installed. Now let's go back to Photoshop. Again, the F key gets us back into full screen mode. So I've got my type tool selected, which is right here in the toolbar, capital T, and this is going to take care of really like all of our text needs. It's just this one tool. Up here is our fonts, and this should look kind of familiar if you've ever used anything like Microsoft Word or Pages or anything like that before, because it's almost really the same thing. I'm just going to type in space, and what I've got here is a space regular, which is what I want. I'm going to choose a size of 36 point. That's usually like my go-to font size when I'm not exactly sure how big the font needs to be yet. And before I do anything else, I just want to make sure my font color at the moment is set to black. And if I were to type in black right now, it'd be really hard to see. So I'm just going to switch that over to white. So I've got a space regular, 36 point, white. And we're going to put that title kind of right here across the center. But sorry, the cool thing about Photoshop is that you don't have to worry too much about exactly where that font is right away, because you can move it, you can do everything to it afterwards. Completely free form. It's really easy to move it around and resize it, do all that stuff. So let's just try to get it somewhere in the right spot. So I'm going to bring my cursor maybe like right here. And I can already tell by the size of that cursor that this font size is probably going to be a little small. So we're going to put in a little title. One of my students came up with one that I thought was pretty funny, which was Peripheract. There we go, Peripheract. Just type it out like you would any other program. And as soon as you're done typing, click the check mark. And I can see that I have my title here, although it's definitely a little bit too small, which we'll take care of in just a second. Now, real quick, if you're super new to Photoshop, the text tool can be a little frustrating because anywhere that you click right now is going to start creating new text. So as soon as you're done typing, I would recommend switching back to the move tool to prevent just like unnecessary stuff from being created that you don't know. or don't need, sorry. All right, so you could experiment with moving it around right now, not that you absolutely have to, but this is clearly too small. And if I wanted to make this text bigger, you could do it a couple different ways. If you're familiar with how Microsoft Word works or Pages or anything like that, you could go back to the type tool, change the font size, but you can also do it a different way. And in Photoshop, especially if it's just something really simple like a title, it's a much better way to do it because it's faster. And we've actually already done it a second ago, which is free transform. So if I go to Command T or Control T on the PC, and I can hold Shift, and I want to make sure to use these corner boxes because it's going to let me make that text bigger. But it won't stretch it out. And I want to take that text and just get that kind of, right in the middle, right there. There we go. Now earlier I said I like to work with extras being turned on up here. And that's because if you have it turned off, yes, the shape looks a little bit better, but it also hides those smart guys, which are really useful. So right now I can see that this text is perfectly centered horizontally, which is exactly where I want it. And if you have the Move tool selected or you're in free transform mode, you can also use the arrow keys on your keyboard. It's something called nudging, which is very useful. And that lets you just kind of move it a pixel at a time, left or right. All right, cool. That looks pretty good. All right, so it's right in the middle, and if I were to zoom in here just a little bit, you can notice that the text is overlapping the shape just slightly here on the left, and also just right over here on the right. Now the next thing that we're going to do, this really doesn't look bad. Again, this could potentially be a pretty cool little digital album cover. Good colors, nice shapes, good geometry. Everything's really high resolution and clean and beautiful. But we're going to, again, kind of take it a little bit further. I want to cut some of the shape out so that it's just solid black underneath my text, which is going to help just pull a little bit more attention to it and make it stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to go to my layer called Shape 1 right here. And again, this is, of course, this big geometric shape that we created earlier. And I want to do some erasing. However, in Photoshop, we don't use the eraser tool because it's destructive. It also just doesn't work with a lot of different types of objects and layers in Photoshop. But the main thing is it's destructive. So when you erase something, it's gone. It's not good. Don't do it. Whenever you're Photoshopping, you should be layer masking. So if I click at the bottom of the layers window, it's a little button that kind of looks like a camera. And then this little white box appears right next to Shape 1. This is something that if you do continue with Photoshop at all, it's a fundamental part of the program, like busing in Logic or something like that. It's absolutely vital. This is how you erase 100% of everything in Photoshop. It works with text, shapes, pictures, you name it, and it's all one technique. Within this white box, it's all about the color white and black, and if you get into it a little bit further, it also does deal in shades of gray, but we really just care about black and white. Anywhere that you paint or fill with black, this layer or the shape is going to go away. Anywhere that you were to paint with white, it's going to come right back. So what I want to do, and if you notice in my bottom of my toolbar, my two colors here are already set to black and white. And anytime you go over to a layer mask, usually by default it will switch that way. I can also use this little bent arrow or the X key, and that will switch between white and black, which is basically erase or hide. So what I want to do is I want to basically just cut a chunk out of the shape underneath that text to give it a little bit more room to breathe and make it stand out a little bit more. I'm going to use a tool called the rectangular marquee right here, which is a selection tool, and all it does is just selects rectangles and squares. And I'm going to just draw a box like this. And I do want to take a little bit of care to try and get the spacing above and below the letters to be about the same, which that actually looks pretty good. Now earlier we used a tool called the paint bucket, which is very useful. We could actually use it now if we wanted to, but there is a shortcut for that, which it's something you actually do more commonly than you might think in Photoshop. Shortcut is Option Delete. And that's all I want to do right now is just Option Delete, and what that's going to do is it fills in that little rectangle that I made with black, which is the main color that I had selected down here. Command D makes those marching ants go away, just like that. All right, now we can kind of see what happened in our layer mask right over here. There's a little, it's hard to see right now, I'm sure, but there is a black strip. That little black strip is telling Photoshop to hide that shape right in that little area. So what I've got is this black stripe going through because we're basically erasing or cutting through that shape to the black background below. And what I'm left with is basically just this. All right, really beautiful, high resolution digital album cover. Perfect for maybe a lot of different styles of music, but this is kind of ideally suited for Djent or that kind of thing, but it can maybe work for anything that's vaguely electronic. All right, really simple, pretty quick to make, totally beginner friendly, and really it's only a couple of layers, and that's it. So I hope you enjoyed making that. Stay tuned. I'll have more of these videos just kind of interspersed. I try to do at least 1 or 2 a month. And if you want to learn anything specific, feel free to leave in the comments below. Check out my channel for other stuff. My website, I do a lot of different stuff. I work for a couple different guitar pedal companies, a lot of freelance stuff. There's tutorials there as well. It's CasaleGraphicDesign.com. And stay tuned for the next one, and thanks for watching.